Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast with Ron and Kristen, where leadership meets entertainment. This podcast features stories with names and certain aspects that have been changed to keep submissions private. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Dirty Side of Leadership podcast, a podcast that shares the name with Ron's best-selling book. We are going to discuss leadership in the movies today. And Ron, I know you're a big movie buff. How excited are you about this episode?
Kristen, I'm so excited. This is one of my favorite topics. I think movies are so cool. I still remember the first movie that I saw. I saw The Jungle Book. It was a Disney movie. I was so fired up. I was just mesmerized altogether. What type of movies do you like, Kristen?
Yeah. Well, I specifically love war movies, and if we really want to go there, Glory is one of my favorites.
Ooh.
Have you seen that?
I have not.
Oh my goodness. So it's a Civil War movie, but we actually watched that my junior year in high school, and that was public school, so I'm actually surprised they really played this. But the whole class, not a dry eye, and I'm talking men, the gals, right? All of us. It's a very emotional movie, but highly recommend. So war movies definitely speak to me.
Kristen, you made me think, our listeners, you probably should keep your phone handy and log in some of these movies, because we had our Facebook group and we had different genres that we're going to talk about a little bit. But for me, I think my absolute favorite movie, I like the hero movies, of course, for the underdog, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but I also love suspense. Although this is not a movie, one of my favorite Netflix shows was Bloodline. This first season, it was so suspenseful, and I realized just how much I like suspense. So what genre do you like, Kristen, besides war movies? Like, what are you looking for?
I say suspense also. I also love movies that are based on either someone's real life or at least true events that have happened.
Yeah.
I don't do well with sci-fi or something that couldn't actually happen. Those my mind just doesn't wrap around. So anything outside of sci-fi, I'm generally into.
Yeah. There's a few sci-fis I like, but I get it. But anyway, for this reason, that's why we chose this great topic. So first, let's take a look about why movies are so important in our culture and why they excite us so much. The first one is storytelling. Movies, they engage an audience. They create emotional connections. Like I said, I remember walking out of the theater and almost wanting to get in a fight after I watched Rocky. And it really was. Or, you watch something tough and you walk out of the movies real tough, a love story. I don't know. I don't watch those much. But anyway, it really is a powerful way, for the purposes of this podcast, it's a powerful way to showcase leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
what else,
it really
Kristen?
is. You know what's interesting is, as you were saying that, the storytelling piece and also the score, if we really think about what probably motivated you, was not only what you were seeing on screen, but the score, the soundtrack that was playing along with it. And just the other day, we were somewhere where they had live music playing, and it was like this Irish, it sounded almost like, just made you want to just march. I don't know where, but it was motivating. And we were playing cornhole, and my son said, "This music makes me want to get my next, the next bag in the hole." And I'm like, see, it's the score. It motivates. So
I'm so glad you brought that up. I can remember if I had like AC/DC or something in, I would speed every time. I would have to make myself slow down. But the soundtracks are so powerful as well. Oh, yeah. And they have quite an impact for sure.
Yeah, they do. And, something else, the visualization. So movies are usually using visual storytelling to bring leadership concepts to life. Seeing leadership play out in front of you in action can help individuals through experiences. And, really, movies can help individuals broaden their understanding of being a leader, because we've talked about this before. Being a leader isn't always just in the office or just in the workplace. You can be a leader in your community, in your family, in your church.
Yeah, it's true.
There's so much.
It's like, Kristen, all of us, like, we love a hero. Everybody wants to see a hero. That's why the Marvel movies, are so popular, because we love the hero. You love to see the bad guy go down and the good guy elevate. Also, these characters become role models, and they inspire, they guide you, and they make you want to improve. They challenge you sometimes in a way that's deeper than maybe even reading a book. And I know a lot of people are not going to like that I said that, but sometimes movies are just more powerful than if you read a book.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on that topic, my daughter has to read 11 novels this year for her homeschool group. And, you know, for some people, they need that visualization for it to really sink in. And there's this, he calls himself the internet grandpa, but he has grandkids in this same curriculum, and all 11 novels he reads, and there's a YouTube channel. And so what my daughter does is she watches the YouTube while she reads along in her book, and it just helps resonate so much. So that visualization aspect, it really is powerful.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, I'm going to talk about the reflection piece here. Movies can encourage self-reflection and critical thinking about leadership. So after a lot of us watch a movie, some of us can reflect on the observed leadership styles within and consider how to apply these insights into our lives, either personal or in the office.
Yeah, it's so true. And Kristen, with CGI, the things they can do with movies now is just unbelievable. Now, you still got to have good writing, but it's just amazing where we've progressed. And sometimes I've made the mistake of going behind the scenes and watching how they put a movie together, and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, it didn't look anything like that. But it is a great way. I encourage parents, pick a particular movie, watch it with your child, and discuss the aspects of it.
Yeah.
God knows we need leadership in our country. We need heroes again, right?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And, you know, I talked about the score very briefly earlier, but I always talk to my kids about when we hear something in a movie, when we hear the score, I say, how did that score make you feel? Did it make you feel empowered, sad? I'm like, see, suspense, right? They all have their own unique sound, and you have an idea of what's going to happen based on the score. And so that's kind of a fun thing, even though my kids are relatively young, is I like to make them think about what the person who actually put this together, what the purpose was for it, right? And how they framed it out.
I would say my oldest daughter, Kristen, watched Jaws 20 times, and, you know, I could literally
Best score ever.
Donna,
absolutely.
You know, and she'd get nervous, and we went out on this little trip. So when we moved to South Carolina, as you know, I'm close to the ocean, and we went out, and there were some dolphins around. Haley panicked. She thought they were sharks, and Jaws cost me a lot that day. It cost me a lot of money, and I finally had to bring the family back 2 hours early because of the dolphins swimming around. But that's how powerful movies are, right?
Seriously. I have to just tell you, I've literally I grew up with a pool in my backyard, above ground, nothing fancy. But I would just think of that score, and I would jump out of my pool. Like, literally, I'm like, this is a backyard swimming pool in the suburbs. And I would be like, there's a shark in here. Yeah. So ridiculous, I know.
Is it Friday the 13th or Michael? It's kill, 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 kill. You know,
I know.
That.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah, my husband
I love it.
He likes to do that around Halloween. Oh, my goodness.
Well,
so, yeah, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, you know, I'm an amateur history buff. And I did some studies on how actually Hollywood was very pro-military, pro-American, especially in the 40s and around World War II. So I think it's important for us to look at the evolution of movies, but also how leadership plays such a role. So what happened is, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, or at least before that attack, a lot of the movies were love stories, you know, things like that. And not many people had TVs. But after World War II, the movies became a propaganda tool, and it really did help people get way more patriotic. There were some anti-Nazi movies that came out, anti-Japanese films, and it was all produced to sway an audience. And we have already talked about how powerful movies are, and it made people want to join the military. It made people want to fight for their country. So it was a very effective way to promote patriotism.
I could see that.
One of the most important things that we saw is that's when a bunch of the military movies started coming out, the war movies. And of course, America was the good guys and everyone else was the bad guys. And when I think about movies today, I was so glad to see Top Gun come out again.
Yes.
Because it was at least patriotic. And I don't know if you've seen this. We won't get into the politics behind this, but almost every movie now, it's always a mole in the U.S. government, or it's always the U.S. government is always at fault. And I just think that, impressionable minds and our kids, they need to see a hero. They need to see some love for their country. They need to see some dedication, loyalty, and those kind of things. So take over, Kristen. I'll get off my soapbox.
Ron likes to say we're not going to be political. That's the way to say, Kristen, keep your mouth shut, because I'm very political. So no, you're absolutely right. I have to say, speaking of Pearl Harbor and speaking of love story, my grandpa was a bomber pilot, and when Pearl Harbor, the movie, came out, I don't know what year that was, he was appalled that they worked in a love story. And I don't blame him. I actually get irritated too. I'm like, cut the fluff. Let's get down to brass tacks. That's not what Pearl Harbor was about, but who knows? Maybe some lovebirds were running around on the docks. What do you think, Ron?
Well,
does love have a place in war movies?
I think there were some love stories when they came back from World War II. Apparently, I think they named that the baby boom age.
Yeah, after.
So I think there were some love stories.
Oh, goodness.
Tell us a little bit more about the history.
Yeah, let's look at some history of influential movies and documentaries. I absolutely love documentaries. I can't believe I didn't say that earlier. So according to historical Navy records, Walt Disney formed the Walt Disney Training Films Unit to produce military training films for the government in 1941. I did not know that until this research was done. Disney produced pro-American war propaganda in order to increase public support for the war, making films for the Navy, the Treasury Department, and the Army Air Force. And this was per the request of the U.S. government. Disney produced films that were anti-German as well as anti-Japanese. Disney's vision was to portray both the Axis nations and having leaders who manipulate, have no morals, and were self-obsessed. Disney also used his well-known characters like Donald Duck to help further the cause of propaganda by reaching a broader audience. Donald Duck appeared in
It's the Führer. It's the Hitler, the Führer. The Führer, I mean.
The Führer.
I'm sorry.
Führer.
Yeah, it's talking about Hitler's face, the Führer's face. It's talking about the actual Nazi. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's embarrassing that I didn't pronounce that right. And Commando Duck. And that won the 1943 Academy Award for the Best Animated Short Film. I had no idea about a large chunk of that until prepping for this episode.
Yeah,
so
isn't
that's
that interesting?
Very interesting. And one more thing here before we move on. It's interesting to note that the female characters in the films were typically active in the war effort as well. And they were seen on the big screen as nurses working in combat zones, factory workers, or mothers at home dealing with the needs of the family, while the husband and father went off to fight. This helped to further promote the idea that everyone was in the struggle together. Pretty wild.
Yeah, it really is. So as the war progressed, Hollywood directors became more involved in the promotion of the war by actually joining the military. John Ford, John Hudson, Frank Capra made documentary films while in the combat zone to bring to the viewing audience a first-hand glimpse of what war was like. Their films were used as recruitment devices, inspiring more men to join the military. Most importantly, the directors in their films helped answer the question about why America should fight in a war that often seems so far away. Big-name actors also put their movie careers on hold and joined the military. Clark Gable, Jimmy Stewart served in the Army Air Corps, and Henry Fonda served in the U.S. Navy. After World War II, the United States entered into a time of prosperity. Up until the late 50s and early 60s, nearly all propaganda movies were seen in the theater. But things began to change a little bit. But anyway, the first television system broadcast was A Straight Line by Philo Farnsworth on September 7th, 1927. And I did not know that, Kristen. I didn't know it was that early.
Yeah.
But until in 1948, 1% of U.S. households owned at least one television, while 75% did by 1955. And by 1992, 60% of all U.S. households received a cable television subscription. Now, Kristen, you know I teach a lot on body language, and I use this example. Over 50% of American households had a TV in 1960 when John Kennedy and Richard Nixon had their debate. It was the first televised debate in American history. And it's interesting to note that when people were surveyed, most believe Nixon won the debate when they listened to the radio, but the majority believed Kennedy won the debate when they watched it on TV. So that shows you the multimedia and the power of TV.
Oh, absolutely. You know, it's funny. I was just looking here. By 1992, 60% of people had cable. Not my household. We had like 5 channels. And I have to tell you, my parents are probably going to be embarrassed. They both listen to the podcast. But I don't know how old I was. I'm thinking like 3, 4, 5. I was watching, Sesame Street. And they were like, what color is the square? And I was like, gray. My parents had a black and white TV. And I'm like, didn't have a lot of money.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, straight up. So, apparently teachers weren't paid that much back in the day, but it's so funny. So that's when they went and bought a color TV. So yeah, I didn't have cable or color for quite some time.
Kristen thought circles and squares were the same color.
Gray, light gray, black. Yeah, sad times, Ron.
Yeah, that's sad.
Goodness gracious.
All right, let's switch a little bit. Let's talk about leadership in the movies.
All right.
The leader represents a powerful force in the films. He serves as a beacon that others look to as a guide. He provides a guiding light to follow in the darkness. He inspires others to take action and leave their mark in history. Mm-hmm. And even when you look at, one time I did a whole youth sermon on the power of a superhero, and I used Batman. He wears a mask, which means he doesn't get any credit. He always stands up for what's right. He goes up against evil forces. So there's so many leadership characteristics, especially the fact that the mask crusaders don't get the credit.
Wow.
So,
I've never really thought about that.
Yeah, it's really true. Now, of course, if you hear on the movies, they say they don't want their loved ones to get killed. And I do understand that. But the bottom line is, Bruce Wayne does not get the credit of the things that Batman does. So I think that's an interesting concept as well.
Is. Yeah, I love that. All right, I want to share what our Facebook group had to say. It's a mixed bag. It's not an echo chamber, the Facebook group we have. And if you're not already part of it, please find us and join. So we basically said, what are some movies that you love that have leaders that have stood out to you in one way or another? And we're going to go back and forth here and read our submissions. But the first one, the movie is Remember the Titans. And Brittany submitted this. And she provided a great quote from the movie. Actions reflect leadership, Captain. So that was pretty
something,
awesome.
Kristen, that's interesting. Sports movies are some of the best leadership movies, Remember the Titans. There are so many of those underdog Cinderella stories where, these teams work hard and they come out on top. And that's one of my favorite genres as well. Me too. We had a few people. Mark Mosley mentioned Platoon, and he mentioned Reagan. And then Lincoln was mentioned several times. And as you know, he's one of my favorite leaders throughout history. I went to his summer home and took a leadership training. And his passion, but also his humility, there's just so many leadership lessons that we could still learn and benefit from Lincoln. It was a great movie, so I was glad to see that one on there. Oh, yeah. So I have Coach Carter from Pamela Hill. In life, we often look at how far we have to go or how far we've fallen short without acknowledging how far we've come.
It's inner strength and perseverance that causes us to overcome. I may not be making A's, but I'm not making F's either. It's not that I have arrived, but I keep pressing.
Yeah, that's a great quote from that movie.
Yeah.
And Kristen, you could literally say, I know the squares and circles are great, but I at least know a square from a circle.
Yeah, right. There you go. I like it.
This was from Stan Ruda, and this was one of my favorite movies, Saving Private Ryan. It's a more modern movie. It's compared to some that we've discussed earlier. But the storyline is that, there's 4 brothers fighting in World War II, and 3 of the brothers gets killed. And Tom Hanks has to go find this 4th brother and bring him home. And because they didn't want one family to lose all 4 siblings. I thought that movie, and Matt Damon plays Private Ryan, and he doesn't want to leave. And it's just, you want to talk about loyalty, patriotism. Yeah. It's a phenomenal movie.
It is. My husband's obsessed with this movie. I remember he told me when it came out, I didn't know him yet when it came out, but he brought his mom, his brother, he went and saw it separate times. And it's one of those movies that really resonated with him and so many other people. I was smirking while you were saying Saving Private Ryan, because I went, I think I was 19 when it came out. And I went with a group of friends, and one of my friends went up and said, 2 tickets for Shaving Ryan's Privates. So I will forever remember that. So anytime somebody says Saving Private Ryan, I chuckle, and it's so not appropriate. But so Kristen, that's how I remember it, Ron.
What's the name of Nemo? Is it Saving Nemo or Finding Nemo? Anyway.
Finding, I think.
I have my daughters with me, and I walk up to the window, and I go, I need 3 tickets for Saving Nemo. And they're like, you mean Finding Nemo? So we still laugh about that as well.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
I want to see, Kristen, I put this in there, or it's from the Facebook group, but I want to see if you've heard of it. So take it away there on this next one.
Facing the Giants?
Mm-hmm.
No, I have not. Jeremy Smith explains his lesson is that if we win, we praise God. If we lose, we praise God. Your attitude is the aroma of the heart. If your attitude stinks, it means your heart is not right. Never give up, never give in, never back down.
This movie was produced by a small Christian company, and it ended up having one of those historic moments that's still talked about. But what happens is one of the players is blindfolded, and another player carries their legs, and they have to bear crawl. They're holding, the wheelbarrow. And basically what happens is when you know that you're, how far the football field is, you feel like you can't make it. So basically they didn't tell this kid. They're like, 5 more yards. They kept going. And anyway, he thinks he's going to the 50-yard line. He ends up in the end zone because of the encouragement and because he was not aware that he'd already passed his goal. And it became a big hit, and it ended up being in all these theaters. It was probably put together for $30,000 or something.
Oh, wow.
And it's a very cool movie if you can find a platform that you can watch that.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Someone mentioned 300, and I don't know how many people have ever seen that, but it was done. Yeah. It was filmed in a cinematic way that's unusual. It almost looks cartoonish, and it is a powerful story of how 300 beat thousands, and we won't go into that, but it's a movie worth watching. To take some time and watch that movie. If you love cinematography and good writing and acting, that's a great movie.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Do you mind covering Unbroken as well?
Yeah. Unbroken, as a boy, Louis Zamperini is always in trouble, but with the help of his older brother, he turns his life around and channels his energy into running, later qualifying for the 1936 Olympics. And when World War II breaks out, Louis enlists in the military. After his plane crashes in the Pacific, he survives an incredible 47 days adrift in a raft until he's captured by the Japanese Navy. Sent to a POW camp, Louis becomes the favorite target of a particularly cruel prison commander. It's got a great story, a great ending, a rescue. I don't want to spoil it, but people should check out Unbroken as well.
I'm going to add that to my list because sounds like something right up my alley.
Yeah, and that was submitted by a friend of mine, Rich Elias.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
What else we got?
All right, what about We Were Soldiers?
Yeah.
Now, that's a great one. So it's based on the best-selling book, We Were Soldiers, Once and Young. And basically, it's a compelling war drama that depicts the true story of the first major battle between the United States and North Vietnamese forces. It's a film about uncommon valor and nobility under fire, loyalty among soldiers, and the heroism and sacrifice of men and women, both home and abroad. Great
Chris
movie.
and I have to take a quick break here and share this with you. Do you have Hulu?
I do.
Kristen, I have got a show for you. It's called Special Forces. They take celebrities.
I've watched it the
Have
whole
you?
season.
Oh
Yeah.
my God.
It's really good, but tell people.
I've been glued to it, but they
Yeah.
basically take them through Special Forces training. Now, of course, it's
no
watered down
joke.
some, but it's
Yeah.
no joke.
No.
And here's the thing that I took away from that. And I know this, but you cannot judge a book by its cover. There was an instance, I won't do a spoiler, but I'm saying there were some timid females that you think, oh my God, they're not going to make the first exercise or the first drill. And psychologically, they're just tough. And you and I have talked about the mental game, and that's what a lot of leadership is. You know, I had plenty of times to be discouraged as a leader, but that resiliency has to kick in. You got to pick yourself up, live to fight another day. And I was just on a podcast, Chris, and I put a little clip. It just got released yesterday.
I saw that. It's awesome.
But I talked about I was not prepared for the loneliness of being an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
And also when you're dealing with the unknown, like no matter what happened with the government, every 2 weeks I'm going to get a direct deposit.
Right.
And unless I did something awful, I'm not going to get fired.
Yeah.
But when you're having to day after day focus on things that you don't know whether it's going to have an impact, you don't know if it's going to sell, you don't know these things.
Yeah.
I found out that my resiliency had to be just as strong, or maybe more so, when I was writing the book dealing with the pandemic than it ever was before. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. I think that's great. And that's a big, I listened to the condensed version that you put out, but I want to listen to the whole thing because that is, for so many people, we've done episodes on this. So many people have left the 9-to-5 workforce, and a lot of new entrepreneurs out there, especially in the past 3 years. And I think your advice is incredibly powerful. Yeah,
in that one, Kristen, I shared my faith more and relying, for so many people. I met today with my friend Dwight Decker, that you and I have talked about, but he's in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame. And he sent me a scripture, and he just fought overseas, and he talked about the pressure. There's an enormous amount of pressure. I used to fight, and the nights before, it's really something, because I had played all team sports, and I remember the first time that I actually had a fight, a competition. And sometimes you may fight. Sometimes I was fortunate enough to be the grand champion. I would fight 6 fights in a row. With a little rest in between, and you have to dig deep and find something. But this is the scripture that Decker sent me. It's Psalms 144:1. It says, "Praise be to the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war, my fingers for battle." He read that every day, getting ready for his for that upcoming fight.
That's incredible. That's powerful stuff right there.
Yeah. Let's go down to Patton.
Yeah. So Guy Smith is who submitted this, and it's a biography of controversial World War II hero General George S. Patton. And the film covers his wartime activities and accomplishments, beginning with his entry into the North African campaign and ending with his removal from command after his outspoken criticism of U.S. post-war military strategy.
There's a scene in that movie, Kristen, that now, if you want a movie that shows the good, bad, and ugly of leadership, George S. Patton is the guy. Yeah. And he's going to visit wounded soldiers, and there's a young man in there who's had a mental breakdown. So he's not injured. he's had, he just lost it. It was too much for him. And Patton looks at him and he hears the problem. He pulls off his glove and slaps him. And that did not go well throughout the military. He got some very bad press. But some people don't understand. If you take Patton probably was pretty wealthy, could have written books, he could have done speeches. But they don't understand people like George Patton were designed for war. That's what they live, eat, and breathe. And he was miserable. He was miserable after the war. MacArthur wanted to go on into Russia. Like, these people are built for war. And I think a lot of people just don't understand why Patton continued to have problems after the war. But that also is a great lesson in leadership, because some of the things Hollywood portrayed, especially, during the war efforts, they make the leader perfect. And that's never the case. So Patton is a great movie. A great movie.
Pretty closer to reality than I would say many are.
I'm going to pick on someone here. I just have to. She listens to our podcast. One of the movies we got was Ferris Bueller's Day Off. That came from my wonderful cousin, Donna Jean Sanfratello.
Hey, Donna.
I just went to visit her in Florida. As you know, my uncle passed her father. I'm very sorry about that.
Aww.
But anyway, she posted that. So I, of course, responded, what's the leadership lesson? And I love this. She said, here's the leadership lesson. There's more to life than sitting in a classroom. And with a little clever ingenuity, you can bend the rules just enough to enjoy life, at least for one day. But she put, but don't ever borrow a Ferrari.
I love this.
If you've seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off, you'll know why you don't borrow a Ferrari.
Donna sounds cool. I completely agree. I like how she's talking about bending the rules. Just enough, not too far to really get in some big trouble. Love that. I know. I saw Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I'm like, okay, riddle me this.
Bueller.
Who's
think
the
what
leader?
An impact. You still hear that all the time if people are zoning out. Bueller. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, it's so true. What about Rocky? Haley submitted this and she put here, going the distance is more important than winning or losing.
The Haley mentioned here, I know quite well. She happens to be my daughter.
I know. I didn't know if you wanted me to
and
say that.
No, I'm going to say this because I responded back and go, why did you use my favorite movie? And she goes, well, it can be mine as well.
I like that.
Anyone that knows me, I love an underdog story. I love the whole fight, the training. And you want to talk about a soundtrack. Oh, my gosh. That music is amazing.
Score.
And Kristen, I was going to tell you one thing I didn't tell you. When you mentioned that Irish music, you don't know this. A lot of times especially if I'm doing martial arts, I listen to Irish rock.
Oh, I
the
love
Dropkick
that.
Murphys and all that. It's always, I feel like, I'm Irish. My ancestors, I feel like it pulls me back in the homeland or something. I don't know, but I've listened to it for years. If I go in an Irish pub and they're playing top 40, I want to slap someone. That's another story.
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying. And it's so funny because when I mentioned the Irish music, we were in the Villages, Florida, which is for people that don't know, it's like a giant 55 and up community, biggest in the world. But they were playing Irish music outside of the Irish pub during the day. And it's amazing. But Ron and I, so we're both Celtic, actually, because I'm like 73% Scottish. I've done all my ancestry research. And what's really cool is I walked down the aisle. I didn't do your typical walk down the aisle wedding music. I walked down to Scotland the Brave with an actual live bagpiper. So that's how into that music I am. So we keep finding out we have more and more in common.
I'm Scottish Irish as well. And
it.
It's interesting, Kristen, and we won't get too far off on this, but there was a group apparently with the Ward Thompsons who got into Mormonism, and Mormons pray for the dead and they keep meticulous records. So my name is actually in this book, but I can go all the way back literally in writing with my ancestry, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
The next one came from...
Well, I have to say,
go ahead.
Mormons do a great job with ancestry. I've actually been downtown. I'm not Mormon. I've been downtown Salt Lake City, and I've used their resources. It's like this massive building where you can go on Ancestry and do some amazing work. So, I'm with you on that.
Another one's Gettysburg, and that's Kit Bell Lemon. And Kit provided the things that she liked about that. But again, it's Lincoln. But she said, this was interesting. Lincoln surrounded himself, basically his cabinet, with strong, intelligent, ambitious individuals for the good of the country, despite the fact that many or most of them despised him and were rivals. And that's a great leadership lesson. Secondly, his priority as leader during the Civil War, first and foremost, was preservation of the Union, despite states' differing issues on hard topics such as slavery. Lincoln was a big picture guy, and he knew he had to keep the Union together. And believe me, we can look back on it, but there were so many times that it looked like the Union was going to lose, and he had to carry the weight of that entire time. Yeah. And I can't imagine what that man went through, and then for him to lose his life the way he did was just, it's unbelievable. Yeah, it
really is. We have a submission from Richard for The Godfather. And this movie is wildly and widely regarded as one of the greatest films of all time. My husband loves this. My dad loves this. This is a mob drama, and it's based on Mario Puzo's novel of the same name. And it focuses on the powerful Italian-American crime family of Don Vito Corleone. Marlon Brando, excuse me.
Marlon played it, yeah.
Marlon Brando. When the Don's youngest son, Michael, played by Al Pacino, reluctantly joins the mafia, he becomes involved in the inevitable cycle of violence and betrayal. So although Michael tries to maintain a normal relationship with his wife, Kay, played by Diane Keaton, big names here, he is drawn deeper into the family business. And Richard, who submitted this, he likes the phrase, "I have an offer you can't refuse."
Yeah, this is Rich Katowski. He's a friend of mine. I'm sure he wanted to say that to me. That was good. I'll tell you what, we won't go into too much more detail, but Hacksaw Ridge is another. Yeah. It's one of those movies about honor. It was submitted by Susie Hess. It's got so many good lessons, from consciousness to duty to honor, valor, words that you really don't hear in our vocabulary.
Yeah,
and I'll tell you something, Kristen, one of my secrets that I teach people in an interview is to use some old-fashioned words. Imagine if you're interviewing someone 20-some years old and they say it would be a distinct honor to work for this company.
They would stand out.
They would stand out, and that's one of the things that I tell them. Full Metal Jacket was provided by Jake Valentine. If you remember, Jake won the drawing for my book.
Yeah.
So that's the Jake. And,
I love it. Thanks,
and then
Jake.
Mary Nielsen, Mary and I taught as professors together, adjunct professors, and she had To Kill a Mockingbird. And anyone that knows the history of that story, it's controversial, but it's a small town in Alabama. Of course, it was during a time when there was a lot of racism. And it chronicles the childhood of Scott and Jim Fitch as their father, Atticus, defends a black man falsely accused of rape. Scout and Jim are mocked by classmates for this. The boys, their father's the lawyer, but the boys get mocked. And anyway, he still gets convicted by an all-white jury, but it did a lot to promote unity and harmony, because people could watch To Kill a Mockingbird. And by the way, it's one of the most popular books of all time. People read that book, and it began to change people's hearts. And it really is an important lesson in leadership. Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. I'll have to add that to my list as well.
Okay. Chris, and I had pulled from the internet on this the top 20 movies. I think it would be cool to run through those and then maybe put a conclusion. But I thought this was very interesting. And by the way, did you see any surprises on here?
No, I was just looking through it. Lord of the Flies. It's tough because some of these I just haven't seen in 25 years.
Yeah.
But Lord of the Flies, I'm trying to think back on the leadership aspects of that. But no, nothing that really is surprising me. It's just a foggy memory.
Well, just for our audience's sake, let's run through the top 20 here. Number 20 was The Last Mohicans. Number 19 was The Alamo. 18 To Hell and Back. I'm going to stop the numbers and just go through Chariots of Fire. The Hoosiers. The Hoosiers. That was the Indiana Hoosiers. Sorry. That is one of my favorite movies. Amazing Grace, Saving Private Ryan, we mentioned, Miracle, Pistol Pete, Blindside. We Were Soldiers. You talked about that. Apollo 13. That's a great leadership movie. Lord of the Flies. Yeah. Schindler's List. I'm going to be totally honest with you. And you know, I've done some posts supporting Israel. That movie is so, it talks about the Holocaust, and it's painful for me. And I've honestly never got through that movie. I'm going to be honest with you. Number 6, The Last Castle. I'll come back to the top 5 here. 300 is that movie that I said looks almost like it's illustrated. That's the movie I was mentioning. Number 4, The Great Escape. Number 3, Invictus. Number 2, Remember the Titans. And number 1, Braveheart. Now, that varies, by the way, with some different sites that I viewed. And it's not the best sellers either. That's, the top movies according to this one particular site.
I like it. That's incredible. I know. And I just want to say one thing, Ron. You mentioned Schindler's List. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, because history repeats itself, and apparently we didn't learn. So
you're right.
Go watch that movie.
So, Kristen, in conclusion, I thought about this from both a family perspective, and a lot of people need mentoring. And one of the things that I did as Academy Director, we watched Thurgood Marshall because when I traveled to D.C., we are in the Thurgood Marshall building in Washington, D.C. So I frequented that building, so I thought, why not? So we watched Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African-American Supreme Court Justice. It was played by Lawrence Fishburne. And we popped popcorn, and we had the best time just watching a movie together. So number 1, if you're a leader and you've got the flexibility, the autonomy, pick a great movie and just bring everyone in, pop popcorn. You can do it as a fundraiser if you want to sell popcorn, give the money to a charitable cause. But it's a great unifier, a great culture builder. But also just doing a survey, like what's your favorite movie? It can be a great icebreaker at the beginning of a meeting to do that. But also, I've thought about, there was someone mentioned The Lion King, and I can remember having leadership discussions with my children based on a good movie. So I can't say enough about a lot of these movies that show the true character of America. And by the way, even in the 50s and 60s, you always had rebel movies, but in general, the majority of the movies always reflected the character of a nation. And, we're a nation somewhat in chaos right now, and it might be time to pull out some of the older movies and watch those with your children and talk about the things that, make great leaders, makes this country great, makes families strong, makes communities strong. And I can't think of a better time than to watch a good, wholesome, powerful movie with your family.
I agree. Or even miniseries. Like I just watched John Adams, and even my 9-year-old son, he watched part of it. It's actually not bad for the youth, I would say. Maybe start at age 12 or so. But you want to learn a lot about our founding fathers and how our nation was started. Watch that with your kids. It's incredible.
Guess what book I'm reading? I read a lot of books, but I'm focused on one book. I'm reading the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, wow.
If you knew,
interesting guy.
If people knew, he basically came up with the idea of the postal service that we use now. He put in Philadelphia the first library, and he had people checking out books. I could go on and on. He influenced or developed so many things. Now, some things he got from England because he spent a lot of time in England.
Right.
But France. You want to talk about an innovator. It is so powerful. Now, it's written in Old English, so I have trouble sometimes understanding what he's saying. So I probably should get a different version. But I have enjoyed reading his perspective on individuals that he met. And he would call people. He would go. He was talking about his own business. He wanted, and by the way, he started a printing company, but he would read books, and their entertainment in the evenings was to have debates on different topics because you didn't have movies. So people would come out and listen to him debate. So he would look at different styles of debaters, and he would read these books and get himself knowledgeable so he could win these debates. And the whole thing is just so amazing, his leadership. But to hear him talk about things like that, things that we forget about. But he would even say something like he went to this town and they had several books. That was his guidepost. So once he got this library concept going, he mentioned that his community was much more educated than most of the other colonies.
Wow.
So, gosh, it's been so good for me to read that. And
yeah, that sounds very interesting. I know he played a huge role in the John Adams series, but in the founding of our country. So.
Yeah, and and he was a governor once, but I'm saying he signed the Declaration of Independence. I mean, anyone that signed that risked their lives. It's just it's powerful stuff. So we need some good old-fashioned great leaders again. We really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been really fun to change it up a bit. And I know Ron and I, we're going to get really creative on what we cover. There's leadership in so many facets of life, and we're really diving deep into sharing those with you.
Yeah, and I want to make sure our listeners know from the very beginning we had where leadership meets entertainment. So we are going to look at some more entertainment values and see how that marries up to leadership. But you can't separate entertainment from leadership because everyone has a personal life. Everyone is entertained by something. So I hope that we can keep this fun and interesting and edgy. I was telling someone about it the other day because the minute I said leadership podcasts, I was talking to a female. I could tell she was turned off. Yeah. And I said, give it a shot because, we're trying to take a different perspective. And that's why we started the podcast. We didn't want to have the same format that every other podcast has. So
Right.
If you've stuck it out, we are so grateful. What could people do to help us out, Kristen? Our numbers are moving up.
Yes, they sure are. So definitely continue to log in and listen to our podcasts. If you have our Spotify and Apple, go look us up on both of those. That helps us out. You can watch our episodes on YouTube, but if you're doing that, don't forget to help our numbers out by going to one of the two I just mentioned, Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, because that actually helps us build the numbers so more and more people can find us.
Yeah, awesome. We probably should start doing that in the beginning.
I know,
but if you've stuck it out, you got the ad. There we go. All right, everybody.
Yes.
Be the leader you're meant to be.
We'll see you next week.
The Dirty Side of Leadership podcast is brought to you by Forward Operations. If you'd like to book Ron or Kristen for speaking events, training, or executive coaching, visit forwardoperations.com. Be the leader you're meant to be.